I need to make sure it's recording. It is. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay, we're going to talk about accommodations, modifications, and then most of it will be about inclusion. So just a special thanks to Jennifer Letts, Sarah Wong, and Missy Norwood and her crew, because they helped with some of the information on it. Okay, so first up is accommodations. An accommodation is a change that helps the student overcome or work around the disability. That's just a little definition. Okay, accommodations do not change the content, but are supports or services that help the student fully access the general education curriculum. Okay, they're not intended to provide students with an advantage over other students. Rather, accommodations are intended to provide access to the student who would not otherwise be able to participate in the grade level instruction. Accommodations are provided on an individual basis, taking into consideration the needs of the students. They should be used routinely in the classroom, instruction, and testing. And the goal of appropriate accommodation use is to determine which accommodations the student needs for access, as opposed to which accommodations would merely provide a benefit or increasing a passing score or a higher score. So there's different types of accommodations that we can provide the students in the classroom. So one is a presentation, so it change the way that the instruction or information is presented. So for example, letting the child listen to audiobooks instead of reading a text. The response that the student gives. Change the way that the child completes an assignment or a test. For example, allowing the child to give spoken answers instead of written ones. The setting, a change in environment where the child works. For example, allowing a child to take a test in a separate room with fewer distractions or a smaller group. Timing and scheduling, a change in how much time a child has to complete a task or being allowed to take breaks. Example, providing extra time on tests for a child. So what are some accommodations that you've used in the classroom, just that you can think of off the top of your head, or one that you use regularly? Anybody?
Extra time.
Extra time, for sure, extra time.
Those little brain breaks where they cross the midline, like get up for a second, cross the midline.
Breaks.
Notes.
Oral admin, that's definitely one you see a lot.
Copy of teacher notes.
Copy of the teacher notes. Breaking a test up over, extended period of time. Good.
Small group admin.
Small group, yeah. So those accommodations, they're provided in the classroom, but like also in a testing situation. So she said oral admin, small group, taking breaks. All of those things can be done in the classroom, but also transferred to when the student's taking tests. And that's tests in the classroom for, just gathering data in the classroom, but also for the state test. And you talk about that when you do ARDS and stuff. So here are some things that I just thought of: reviewing the directions, using mnemonic devices, having the student restate information, provision of notes or outlines, and then concrete examples. Okay, so let's look at modifications. So accommodations did not change the content that you're giving. Modifications, you're changing the content, okay? Or what the student is expected to learn or demonstrate, okay? That's the big difference between accommodations and modifications. Content modifications, this can be a word bank for answer choices, provisions of a calculator or a number line for math tests, film or video supplements in place of reading a test, rewording questions in similar language, projects instead of written reports, highlighting important words and phrases in reading assignments. I think accommodations and modifications right now we can start thinking of them, I guess, in a different way, because we're so technology heavy right now. We can have things read to them pretty easily. We can record the directions, and they simply push a button and it reads it to them. So those kind of things actually right now are helpful with technology. Technology can be a burden sometimes. All right, what about behavior? Can you have behavior modifications? Yes, yes. If so, what are some that you think you've used in your classroom? Break cards.
Like if they work for so many minutes, then they get to take a break or do some activity that is a reward.
Yeah.
For working.
Yeah, so what?
First then.
First then, what you were talking about was like a token system. You do these things and then you get your reward. So yes, you can do behavior modifications, breaks between tasks. That's really a big one that we use a lot. And then cue expected behavior, daily feedback for the student. And we also have the DBRCs, which give you, just constant feedback through each teacher that they see throughout the day. So have a contingency plan for that student. So if this happens, what are we gonna do? Use a de-escalation strategy. So if we know this kid can escalate pretty quickly, what are some things that help him to de-escalate, and have those on hand ready to put into place. Use positive reinforcement, and then use proximity or touch or control. The de-escalation strategies really depend on the kid. I know I have one kid that, going outside to that little spinning tulip thing is crazy reward. So yesterday we were talking to a parent. I was, communicating with a parent, and he would not do any work at home. Like, he was throwing a fit, like crazy escalation. She had to take the computer away from him so that we still had the computer at school. So I just text back, said for every task that he completes, he gets a minute outside. And so she said it was like instant. He was like done, he was going to work, and he completed the tasks that I give him. So you really just learn the kids and what do they like, and how can you use that in a de-escalation strategy. So IEP and ARD considerations. Be able to report to parents and the ARD committee how modification accommodations are being implemented. So you want to make sure that you know what the accommodations modifications are and how you're implementing them in your classroom. Be prepared to explain to the ARD committee the individualization for the student. If you take a break for everybody, then that's not breaks for that child. Does that make sense? So services, accommodations, modifications cannot be denied due to staffing or unwillingness of a campus or district. And we all know that. If it's in the ARD document, we've got to provide it. What are some ramifications or failure to implement? Teacher evaluations, legal issues, public record, all those not so fun things. But the ARD is a legal document. So if it's on there that he or she is to get these things, then those things need to be provided for him. If you can't do it, then an ARD committee needs to come together and figure out how, what other things that you can do in order to serve that kid. All right, so accommodations, modifications, we're good to go on those. They're pretty self-explanatory. They're in the ARD. When you go to ARD, you will decide on them in the ARD committee, and If you are in the art committee and you're like, I don't think this kid needs this, then that's the time to speak up and say, I don't think he needs this. This is what I think he would need, things like that. So accommodations, modifications are made during the art committee meeting. All right, the next thing, which is the bulk of our stuff, is inclusion. So inclusion can look different for a lot of kids. And so we're just gonna kind of walk through. So inclusion in your art, you've heard this, I'm sure, many times. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled, and that removal of children with disabilities from the regular classroom occurs only if the disability is such that the education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So Manley or Lopez or Christian get to read this whenever you have an ARD. That's just saying that we're going to include them in the general ed classroom as much as we possibly can, as much as their allows with their disability. So what this means is you're gonna have extra hands in your classroom, because if they're coming into inclusion, they're going to come in with an aid at some point. Your resource and inclusion kids, they're gonna come in with an aid at certain times in the day. Your self-contained kids, those kids are gonna come in every time, most of the time, every time with an aid. There's some kids that are able to come in without an aid, a paraprofessional with them, but most of the time they're gonna come in with somebody. So now you have an extra person in the room. What do you do? Okay, collaboration between all professionals is key in order to meet the educational needs of students with diverse learning options. So, I mean, collaboration is really, like, it's the big one here. If you can't collaborate with that person, then it's like they're not even there. Okay, we want to make use of them. So norms, set norms of collaboration. You know, what are some things that in your classroom, this is what happens when this happens. You know, providing data, paying attention to others, self and others, things like that. You know, putting ideas on the table. You know, how do you share ideas with each other, that kind of thing. Ways to teach with a paraprofessional. All right, so we're gonna look at some different ways that you can utilize that paraprofessional in your classroom. So we're gonna go through one person teach, one observe, one teach, one assist, parallel teaching, station teaching, alternative teaching, and team teaching. All right, one teach, one observe. One of the advantages is that more detailed observation of students engaged in the learning process can occur. With this approach, for example, teachers can decide in advance what types of specific observational information to gather during instruction and on the system for gathering the data. Afterward, the teachers, general ed and special ed teachers, should analyze the information together. So in this scenario, you have the teacher teaching and the aide is just observing. The paraprofessional is observing. They're taking data, they're taking notes. This one probably won't happen a whole lot unless you're trying to grab data on something specific. Like if we're coming up to needing to look at a specific IEP and have they mastered that IEP. So the aide may stand back and observe if that student can do whatever it is. So I would say this probably is gonna happen at least every, like at the progress report time and like report card time, just so that they can have specific data for IEPs or even grades, if you're needing different kind of grades and such. So afterwards, the teachers, the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher will analyze the data. So the paraprofessional is the one taking the data, but the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher are the ones that need to talk about the data. One teach, one assist. Teacher keeps primary responsibility for teaching while the paraprofessional circulates through the room, providing non-obtrusive assistance to students as needed, collects data and observations, and monitors student behavior. I would say probably this is one of the most common ones because it allows that person to help all the students, but also they can hone in on the ones that they need to help specifically without, singling them out and pulling them aside. And I would say it's the easiest for you as a teacher and the paraprofessional to work together in doing, because they're not doing something, specific with whatever lesson you're doing. They have the ability to just, have the data and collecting the data on their students and observations, and they can give you observations about other students if needed. If you have a kid that's coming up that you want to test for special ed or something like that, that would be a perfect time to grab some data on them along with the data that they're taking on their special ed students that are in your room. And monitoring student behavior because, let's just be honest. Yay. Having another person in the room is always nice. Parallel teaching. So parallel teaching, the teachers are both covering the same information, but they divide the class into two groups and teach simultaneously. This allows the students to have more supervision by the teachers or more opportunity to respond. So this one would take a lot of preparation. And I probably wouldn't see this a whole lot, but you can still do it. You would just have to prepare that paraprofessional with everything that they would need in order to teach the same thing you're teaching. It would be awesome because you would have a much smaller group of kids that you're being able to focus in on. But like I said, it would take a lot of planning between you and the paraprofessional and making sure that they know exactly what they're going to be doing when they go to teach. Station teaching, teachers divide up content and students. Each teacher then teaches the content to one group and subsequently repeats instruction for the other group. If appropriate, a third station could be give the students an opportunity to work independently. This is a good one because you could be doing something, a new content, and the paraprofessional could be doing a review of something y'all previously did in the room, and then they could be doing an independence station. It could be that you could have it so you're both teaching the same thing. So she's just doing it in a different way than you're doing it, but the kids are getting it 2 times so that they are able to understand. I would say this one is more, you could see this one more often just because if the paraprofessional is teaching a review, then they could be doing that at one station and you would be doing the new stuff at the other station. Alternative teaching. In most class groups, occasions arise in which several students need specialized attention. In alternative teaching, one teacher takes responsibility for a large group while others work in a small group. I've seen this one a lot with paraprofessionals coming in, and that is that, you have a small fraction of kids that just really need some more work on identifying money. Okay, so you've got like 3 or 4 kids, maybe 5 kids that they're still just struggling with money, and you're going on to adding money or something like that. So that paraprofessional or that aide can pull that small group and work on number identification. Now you want to make sure that the person that they're in there to see is in that group because they're in there to see somebody specific, that inclusion kid. And so if you're giving them 5 other kids and they're inclusion kids over here, they're not able to take any data. They're not able to assist that kid. And so their time with that kid would be just null and void. He would miss out on that time. So this would really only work if that kid was in the group that needed that extra support with the ID money. Let's see. Yeah, I think that was it. Got that one. Team teaching. This one would be fun. In team teaching, both teachers are delivering the same instruction at the same time. Team teachers work together to plan, conduct, and evaluate the integrated outcomes, curriculum, learning activities, and assessments. Team teachers share equal levels of responsibility. Most co-teachers consider that approach the most complex but satisfying way to co-teach, but the approach that is most dependent on teacher styles. Okay, so this one would mainly be if you had two teachers, but it could be done with a teacher and a paraprofessional. When I think about team teaching with a paraprofessional, I think of the same thing as if the paraprofessional was taking a group and teaching the same thing, and y'all were small groups. Does that make sense? Because they would have to know specifically exactly what you're going to be teaching. They would specifically have to know, how you're delivering that information, and, your lesson plan, and kind of go through your lesson plan with them. So this would take a lot of planning. And it would be probably one of the more difficult ones to pull off. And so I don't think you would see it much with a paraprofessional. If you had, two teachers, that would be a little more doable, just because you're going to be teaching. I mean, you're both going to know what the lesson's going to be. So team teaching with the paraprofessional. The teacher and the para teach and tutor together in this method. So it could be that you're not teaching new content, you're reviewing content. That could definitely be something that you could do during team teaching, because the paraprofessional's already heard your content, delivered, and so they can just assist with the tutoring or the reteaching. The teacher gives student access to both teacher and paraprofessionals at the same time. The teacher can teach and the para can paraphrase, or the paraprofessional can read and the teacher can expand on the text. So this can just be using the paraprofessional in just different ways. Like it says, that having the paraprofessional read, and then you're expanding on what that paraprofessional is saying. So I actually do this a lot in my room, because my paraprofessionals are in there a lot, and so they may be reading something and they're just reading it, but I'm pulling out different questions that I want the kids to be answering during the story. What did this character do? Who was that character? Why do you think they did that? Pulling those questions that I want them to start thinking of and answering, while the paraprofessional is really focusing on reading whatever the book is. So I'd say this happens a lot more in like our type of, self-contained classrooms than it would in a general ed classroom. But it could still happen. It would just take a lot. Okay, we talked about communication when we first went into inclusion, because communication's gonna be the big thing. When things don't work out, when things go crazy, more than likely communication has broken down somewhere. So there has to be communication between the general education teacher, the paraprofessional, and the student, and the general special ed teacher. Forgot that in there. It's in the picture, it's just not in the words. So those four people really have to talk a lot. And with as many, special ed kids as you might have in your room, you're going to be talking to those people quite a bit about just the different students that you have. So the general ed teacher is going to be talking to the paraprofessionals because they're in the classroom. We'll talk about, later, but, not to talk about the student in front of A, the student, or B, other students. And we'll get to that in a second. But So the general ed teacher is talking to the para, but mainly they're going to be talking to that special ed teacher, because the para and the special ed teacher are going to be talking a lot about the data that paraprofessional is collecting and taking. And then the special ed teacher is going to want to talk to the general ed teacher about, hey, how are things going? This is the data that we have so far. You know, it's working, it's not working. What can we do to change it? You know, hey, things are golden, let's keep going. And then to the student also needs to know how things are going. Hey, I've really seen that you have been doing great on writing, good job, you know, things like that. They need to know how they're doing on the things that the paraprofessional is coming in there to see them in. I mean, just like you would any other student, on how they're doing on things, you know, even more so for that special ed student, just because they're gonna know that they don't know these things, especially in the older grades that they get. And so just communicate with them how they're doing, it goes a long way. Okay, data collection is another important thing that I've, you know, said a lot throughout this inclusion part, and that's because that is like the number one thing that special ed teacher needs, because that paraprofessional is coming into your room for that student because the ARD has said they need help here, and so that special ed teacher is having that paraprofessional take that data specifically on those things that in the ARD they said they needed. So all professionals can assist in collecting data on a student, mastery of goals and objectives. Criteria checklists will be developed by the general ed and special ed teachers. So the paraprofessionals are taking the data, but they're not analyzing it. They're not doing anything like that. They are simply taking the data, putting it on paper, and then giving it to the special ed teacher. And then you as the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher will be working together to analyze that data and determine how the student is doing on that specific topic. So data collection is a huge one for that paraprofessional. And so when we talked about the different ways that you can utilize a paraprofessional, you know, they have to make sure that they're able to get their data that they need in order to take it back to that special ed teacher. So there's two different types of inclusion that we do here at Sparta, and that's the inclusion for the general ed students that are receiving special education services, such as resource and inclusion students, and then also for the self-contained students. I'm gonna freeze here. Does anybody have any questions about the use of a paraprofessional in the classroom? No, good, okay. All right, so then we have the inclusion for the self-contained special education students going into the general ed classroom. Because like we said at the very beginning, we want those kids to have access to the general ed classroom as much as we possibly can. Okay, inclusion for general ed students. So when we're talking about the resource and inclusion kiddos that are in your classroom and that paraprofessional is coming in, as the special ed teacher, what do we want those paraprofessionals to do? So we're going to look at how we want the paraprofessionals to act, what we want them to do. And so you as the general ed teacher should know, okay, when these paraprofessionals come in my room, this is what they should be doing. This is what's expected of them when they step into my classroom. So the paraprofessional of the inclusion of the general ed student, they have to be flexible. I mean, I think just to work in a school, you have to be flexible. But be flexible, be on time. That's super important because your special ed students that are getting inclusion have a specific amount of time. You know, they have a specific number of minutes that they get every day or every week from the special ed paraprofessional. So like when the paraprofessional goes in, they document when they enter the room, and when they leave, they document when they leave the I know we have adopted recently a new app. I don't even know if it's an app, web-based something. It's called Easy Sped Tracker. And so literally our aides walk into the room with the iPad, press start, and once they're done doing whatever they do, they leave the classroom and press stop. And so it tracks minute to minute how much time they're in that classroom with those kids. And so, you know, we say, hey, they need to come in for 30 minutes. And you're like, well, my, you know, whatever doesn't last that long. It only lasts for 20 minutes. Well, they're just going to stay in there for the next thing that you do. So if you're doing a read aloud, which backs up to your writing, then they're going to start the writing with your class. Are they going to finish the writing with your class? No. But, I mean, the paraprofessional being in there. But they can start it with that student in there, depending on what that student needs. Obviously, stay off devices, but it has to be said because be organized. So making sure that that paraprofessional knows where their data collection sheets are, you know, if they keep them with them, knowing or having them all, you know, neatly organized so that they don't look like a hot mess coming into the classroom fumbling papers, because you want them to be as least intrusive as possible when they're walking into your classroom. I mean, you don't want them to have this big show when they walk into the classroom because that disrupts what you're doing as the teacher. Open communication with the SPED teacher and the other staff. So that goes back to that communication. There's got to be that circle of communication. Here it is. Don't get into conversations with the teacher about the student's background. So advise them to contact the SPED teacher for other questions. So as the general ed teacher, you want to know as much as you can on that student, but that paraprofessional is probably not the one to ask. The special ed teacher is going to be the one that knows the most about them because they're the ones that write their goals, objectives, accommodations, modifications, and all that stuff for the ARD. Follow your schedule. This one's a hard one because sometimes you just get going with whatever's happening in the classroom, and but your next kid, as a paraprofessional, your next kid needs you. So making sure that you're on schedule so that you get those minutes in. You must stay in the classroom to provide your inclusion time, even if the teacher says that they don't need you. Okay, so first of all, don't ever say that you don't need the aid because they're in there for a specific reason. They're in there for that student. You may not need them for that day, but that student has to get those minutes in. And so that's why the paraprofessional has to stay for that time. And document goal progress. So as the paraprofessional, they need to document the goal progress, any behavior issues, and what they do with the student each day. So what the paraprofessional is having to do with that student each day is important because if, you know, we have them for X amount of time and because they're, you know, independent in the classroom, but when the aide comes in, that aide's having to do everything with that student and, you know, prompt them on everything, get out your paper, get out your pencil, that kind of stuff. It needs to be noted because when you go to ARD, well, this kid needs a lot more support than we initially thought. So as a paraprofessional, you're there to help all students, but don't hover or sit next to the student unless it's a small group type situation. So this is just saying don't single out the one student that you're there for. They can help all the students, but obviously they still need to document what they need to on their specific student. You're not there to do errands for the teacher. It's okay to help every once in a while. Every once in a while we know something happens, but just make sure that it's, you know, it doesn't happen often. It's okay to make decisions to modify or make accommodations to their work. So that paraprofessional has the ability to modify or accommodate that student's work. They would just document what they're doing and, you know, take it to the special ed teacher. That data collection for that is going to be really specific or really important when, like I said, when they go to ARD and talk about how much support this kid needs. The next thing, follow the IEP. The paraprofessionals should know the IEP. They should possibly even have it, and know the students' needs before they go into the classroom. Inclusion is in the classroom, not in the hallway, so that paraprofessional is not going to grab that student and go out into the hallway, because that's not inclusion. They're not included in the classroom. Tracking minutes, we talked about that, making sure that they're in there for the amount of time that they need to be for that student. Ask questions. As a paraprofessional, it's okay to ask questions, the teacher questions, to clarify what's needed. That way you're not telling the student what's wrong, or telling the student something wrong that they needed to be doing. And then do not discuss student issues in front of the student or class. So that goes for the paraprofessional and the teacher. But we'll talk about the teacher now. So as a inclusion teacher, what are some things that you need to know? Number one, don't discuss the student's issues in front of the student or class. I mean, that's just, you don't want to air all their information. That is awesome, by the way. It's time to drink some water, Dustin. Be aware of accommodations. Know what this is important, one, for the SPED teacher to make sure that you have all the accommodations that you need, but also that you have looked over the accommodations and you know what that student needs. Have a file in the class, a place so the student works, so you can grab it to make copies quickly to gather data. Please let us know of a schedule change. So this is from the special ed teacher. If there's a schedule change, they've got to know, because they've got to know how to adjust their minutes. Document accommodations that you give in the classroom. Don't put all the SPED students in one area. Spread them out. Let them sit next to, all different levels of kids. We don't want them all just, clumped together. We can help all students, but we need to work with our students the most. That's mainly for the paraprofessional side. Utilize the extra help with the pairs when they come in. It's okay to give them reading groups. So we talked about those different types of ways that you can teach with the paraprofessional. They want to help out. They want to work. They don't want to just sit or stand in one place and not get to work with students. So utilize them. When they come in, have something for them to do. They're going to come in at that time every day. So, make use of them while they're in there. They really do want to do something. It, becomes a really boring day if they're just standing around, going from classroom to classroom and just standing and watching kids and not interacting with them. Get to know the whole child. Don't just look at the label and assume anything. When you first get your documentation, you may look at a kid and you're like, big eyes, like, oh my goodness, what is going on? Don't assume anything. That kid could be, leaps and bounds from what you would assume from what is in their documentation or what's in their stuff that you get. So look it over, know the kid, but then get to know the kid as a whole. Do not single out the students when the paraprofessional walks in the door. Be like, hey, Jesse, your paraprofessional's here, or Miss So-and-so's here for you. Like, okay, don't do that. Because the paraprofessional can help everybody. Obviously, they're going to be focused on that one kid, but they can help everybody. Communicate with the SPED teacher how the student's doing, and if they need help, don't wait until there's a huge problem or they're failing, to communicate. So there's that communicate thing again. Communication is important. It's really important about behavior. It's important with academics. And like it says, don't wait until there's a huge problem, like they're failing, or, they've gotten so many referrals and you just don't know what to do. You're at your wits' end. Like, communicate with the special ed teacher. They have things in their pocket that they can pull out and help you and assist you throughout the day. They are your students, and we are there to support you and them. Please contact the parents just like you would with any other kid if they were not special ed. We're not responsible for behavior if the kid's not in SPED for behavior. That just means it's okay to write a referral if the kid's in special ed, but if they're not in special ed for behavior. So that takes a whole nother spin on things. But we're not responsible for making sure that the students do their homework. We are here to support the students on the work that's being given in the classroom. So just know that they're there for the classroom work and not homework. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about inclusion of the self-contained student. These are the students that are in a self-contained special ed classroom, and they're going into the classroom for general education time. So for the teacher, have a designated space for the students. A desk in the corner by itself isn't gonna work. Now, with COVID times, it's a little different because there's so many desks that have to be spread out and all these things. Just make sure that there's a space for them that they feel welcomed. You know, don't put it, you know, way over here in a corner where they're not by anybody or things like that. Make sure that they're able to communicate with the other kids if needed, and also that you're able to go and check on them as the time goes on throughout the lesson. All students are expected to follow classroom rules. So any student that goes into your classroom, they're expected to follow the classroom rules just like any other student would. And if they're not, then they need to, you know, you can get onto them for not following directions because they are going into the classroom because we know that they can. And so if they're not following directions, then they, you know, communicate with the student and then also communicate with their teacher. Have copies of classroom activities for the inclusion students. So just make sure that you have, if you're doing a worksheet, make sure that you have enough copies for the kids that are coming in. Nothing's worse than having to go into inclusion and just sit there and watch the other kids do a worksheet. Don't send the para on errands to watch your class while you slip out. They're there to help assist those students that are coming into your classroom. Obviously, every now and then, if you have to go to the bathroom, we understand, but just don't make it a habit. Call on the inclusion students to answer questions. Once again, they're in your classroom because we know they can be. So feel free to ask them questions, call on them. They'll surprise you, I promise. Provide feedback to the teacher about how it's going. This one's a big one. If it's not going well, don't kill yourself to try and make it work out. Talk to the teacher so that they can try and figure out how to adjust their schedule or how to deal with the student's behavior. Whatever it is, talk to their teacher. I promise they are willing to work with you. Know the kids by name. Make sure you know who they are. Getting them mixed up, that's understandable. But just make sure you know the kids that are coming into your classroom. Expect to be at their ARD. So you are their general ed teacher. And so know that you're going to be sitting in their ARD and you're going to be telling how they do in class. Just saying that they are sweet doesn't tell the parents much. So tell them how they behaviorally, how do they act in your classroom? How do they do on, you know, just make notes of, hey, when we did a math problem, he really understood that. Or, you know, we were reading whatever book and he was able to answer the questions and things like that. But make some specific comments about how they're doing in class. Check on them, even though the para is with them. So make them feel included. The para is gonna be standing by them, helping them, sitting with them, you know, right there with them, but you still need to come by, check on them, make sure that they feel included in the classroom, just like you would any other student that's in your room. Okay, this is for paraprofessionals. I feel like there we go. I missed the little heading. Paraprofessionals, off your phone and attention to students. The paraprofessional shouldn't be on the phone pretty much ever inside the classroom. If they need to do any kind of phone stuff, it needs to be outside the classroom, just like any teacher would. Help adjust tasks so that I will go back up to that. If there's a behavior issue and they need to get in contact with the teacher, that's gonna be totally different. And so they may either send a text or shoot a phone call. You know, I've had many phone calls of, you know, the Zoom's not working, and so I have to run down and try and fix that. That's fun. And then also, yeah, so-and-so won't leave the classroom. So, you know, if it's something like that, that's understandable. But during the teacher's lesson and during the work with the student, no cell phones need to be out. Help adjust the task to the student so the student can do it as independently as possible. So the paraprofessional is there to help the student. If the teacher gives a worksheet and let's just say there's, you know, 4 choices of what the student can choose, narrow it down to 2 or 3. That way the student can, you know, be able to choose from one of those 2 things, or, you know, just help assist that student so that they can do it as independently as possible. Track minutes, we talked about that with our general ed students. It's the same with our kiddos. We, you know, want to know how long that they're going in there for, because we have already in a specific amount of time. Data is the same thing. We've got to have data on how they're doing in the classroom. You're not necessarily working on IEPs in the classroom, but you may. And so if I have a kid that's working on addition with regrouping and they go into the classroom and you're doing that, like, I definitely want that aide to make sure that they're getting data on that, how they're doing it in the general ed classroom and how independently they're able to do it. Encourage participation. Sometimes our guys are a little shy, especially at the beginning, because they don't know a whole lot of people. And so just the paraprofessional just needs to encourage them to participate. You are responsible for getting students to and from inclusion on time. This may mean that you get up and leave in the middle of a story. This one's important. Just like with our general ed students, that para has to go to the next, you know, inclusion that they have to do. Same goes for these kiddos, you know, except for they have to get the kids up and take them out the class. But I mean, we have a schedule and they have probably another inclusion that they have to go to. And so this is probably the hardest thing I know for my paraprofessionals to do, because they want to stay and hear the rest of the story. They want the kids to stay and hear the rest of the story. But that's an extra 5-7 minutes that now we're off our schedule. And so as hard as it is for them to get up and leave, it needs to be done just so that we can try and stay on our class schedule as close as possible. If behavior becomes a problem, if the student's behavior becomes a problem, pull them out and have a conversation with the teacher, but don't go into the behavior in front of the rest of the students. So pull them out if you can. Like, as a paraprofessional, pull them out if you can. Sometimes if it's a behavior you're not able to pull them out, that's when that phone call would happen, and the teacher would come in and help to get that student out, because we don't want them interrupting, you know, the general education classroom. If it becomes persistent, then you figure out, as the teacher and the paraprofessional and the general ed teacher, okay, what can we do to make this successful? Because we want the student in there. How, you know, what is it that's, you know, triggering that behavior, things like that. How can we make it successful for that student? Both resource and self-contained special education students are your kids. So treat them as if you would any other student that's assigned to your class roster. So that's the general education students. Obviously they're in your room, but also those self-contained students that come into your room, they're yours. Make them yours, treat them as yours, and just know that the relationship you build with them is huge. They love going into the classroom, and so, you know, just, you know, foster that. Talk about any problems. Talk it out with the teacher. They're there to help. We're here to help. So as a special ed teacher, you know, I know those kids really well, and as a special self-contained. And so if you're having an issue with it, you know, I could be like, oh yeah, this is what we do for that. Or, you know, things like that. Because more than likely it's something that we've worked through in our classroom, but it's a new environment. And so they're testing the waters. Can I get away with this? No, you can't. But that communication has to be there, because otherwise then yes, they do get away with it. And then it becomes a bigger issue than it has to be. Questions? Comments? Yay. Anything? All right. Y'all are awesome.
Great information.
All right. Let's stop sharing. I'm going to stop the video. Wait, how do I stop recording? There it is.